Rebecca Martinez stared at the stack of medical papers in her trembling hands, the fluorescent lights of Phoenix General Hospital casting harsh shadows across the consent forms. The surgeon's words echoed in her mind. Without this procedure, your daughter has maybe 6 months. But the number at the bottom of the estimate made her stomach drop, $347,000. As a single mother working 2 jobs just to keep their small apartment, that might as well have been $347 million. I'm sorry, she whispered to Dr. Chen, her voice barely audible above the beeping machines. I can't sign this. What happened 3 hours later would change everything she thought she knew about hope, insurance, and the system that seemed designed to crush families like hers. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 6 months earlier, life in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Tempe had felt almost normal. Rebecca worked the morning shift at Valley Medical Supply, handling inventory and shipping, then rushed across town to her evening job cleaning offices downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept food on the table for her and her 15-year-old daughter, Sophia. Sophia Martinez was everything Rebecca had dreamed of in a daughter: brilliant, funny, with dreams of becoming a marine biologist. She spent her afternoons at the local community center helping younger kids with homework while Rebecca worked. The teenager had inherited her mother's stubborn determination and her late father's quick wit, though she'd grown up never knowing him. The first sign something was wrong came on a Tuesday evening in March. Rebecca had just walked through the door, exhausted from scrubbing office floors for 6 hours, when she found Sophia doubled over on the couch, her face pale and sweaty. "Mija, what's wrong?" Rebecca dropped her purse and rushed to her daughter's side. "It's nothing, Mom, just my stomach, probably something I ate at lunch." But Sophia's attempt at a reassuring smile couldn't hide the pain in her dark eyes. Rebecca pressed her palm against Sophia's forehead. No fever, but something felt off. Call it mother's intuition or just years of worrying about everything that could go wrong when you're raising a child alone, but Rebecca knew this wasn't just a stomachache. "We're going to urgent care," she declared, already reaching for her keys. "Mom, no, you know we can't afford that right now. Remember the water heater bill?" Rebecca paused. Their ancient water heater had given up the ghost 3 weeks earlier, and the $800 repair had wiped out what little savings they had. Their bare-bones insurance plan came with a $5,000 deductible, money they simply didn't have. But looking at her daughter's pale face, Rebecca made a decision that would haunt her for weeks to come. "It can wait until tomorrow. If you're not better, we'll go then." That night, Rebecca lay awake listening to Sophia toss and turn in the next room. Every groan, every sharp intake of breath made her question her decision. But morning came, and Sophia seemed a bit better. She even managed to eat half a piece of toast before school. For 3 weeks, the episodes came and went. Sophia would double over in pain, then seem fine a few hours later. Rebecca found excuses each time: stress from upcoming exams, teenage hormones, bad cafeteria food. Deep down, she knew she was bargaining with herself, trading her daughter's immediate comfort for the financial stability that kept a roof over their heads. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning in early April. Rebecca woke to the sound of retching from the bathroom. She found Sophia on the floor, vomiting blood. This time, there was no hesitation. Rebecca scooped up her daughter, grabbed her purse, and drove like hell to Phoenix General's emergency room. The ER was a nightmare of fluorescent lights, crying children, and the smell of disinfectant mixed with human misery. Rebecca held Sophia's hand as they waited 3 hours to be seen, watching her daughter grow paler by the minute. When they finally got called back, the nurse who took Sophia's vitals frowned at the blood pressure reading. Then came the questions: insurance information, emergency contact, medical history. Rebecca answered what she could, but Sophia had always been healthy. No major illnesses, no surgeries, no family history of anything serious. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was the kind of physician Rebecca had always imagined her daughter might become someday: confident, kind, with gentle hands and a reassuring voice. But the questions she asked made Rebecca's chest tighten with worry. How long has she been having these episodes? Any changes in appetite, weight loss? Have you noticed any swelling? Rebecca found herself admitting to weeks of symptoms she'd convinced herself were nothing. With each answer, Dr. Walsh's expression grew more serious. The blood tests came back first, then the CT scan. Rebecca sat in the waiting room for what felt like hours, watching families come and go, some relieved, others devastated. She tried to prepare herself for bad news, but nothing could have prepared her for what Dr. Walsh told her when they were finally called into a small consultation room. "Mrs. Martinez, I need to be direct with you. Sophia has a large mass in her abdomen. Based on the location and the imaging, we're looking at what appears to be a malignant tumor involving her liver and possibly other organs." The words hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Malignant. Cancer. Her 15-year-old daughter, who'd never even broken a bone, had cancer. "We need to get her admitted immediately and run more tests. We'll need an oncology consultation, more detailed imaging, probably a biopsy to determine exactly what we're dealing with. But I want you to understand, time is critical here." Rebecca nodded numbly, trying to process the information while Sophia squeezed her hand. Her daughter was being so brave, asking practical questions about treatment options and timelines, while Rebecca struggled to form coherent thoughts. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of specialists, tests, and medical terminology Rebecca had never wanted to learn. Sophia was admitted to the pediatric oncology ward, a place that felt like entering a different world, one where children fought battles no child should ever face. Dr. Marcus Thompson, the pediatric oncologist, was a tall, soft-spoken man who'd been treating children with cancer for 20 years. He delivered the final diagnosis with the kind of gentle firmness that Rebecca realized came from having these conversations too many times. "It's hepatoblastoma, a rare liver cancer that primarily affects children. The good news is that it's treatable, especially in someone Sophia's age. The challenging part is that the tumor is quite large and has grown into blood vessels and surrounding tissue." He pulled out images from the latest MRI, pointing to areas that looked like abstract art to Rebecca, but told a story of life and death to him. "We're looking at a complex surgical procedure, what we call a liver resection with possible reconstruction. We'd remove the affected portion of the liver along with the tumor. The liver has remarkable regenerative capabilities, so if we can get clear margins, Sophia has an excellent chance of full recovery." Rebecca felt a surge of hope. Treatable, excellent chance. These were words she could hold on to. Then Dr. Thompson continued, "However, this is a very specialized procedure. We're talking about an 8 to 12-hour surgery with a team of specialists. The recovery will be lengthy, probably 6 to 8 weeks in the hospital, then months of follow-up care." "But she'll be okay?" Rebecca asked, needing to hear it again. "If we can perform the surgery successfully, yes. The 5-year survival rate for this type of cancer, when we can achieve complete resection, is over 90%. Rebecca exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. 90%. Those were odds she could live with. "When can we schedule the surgery?" Dr. Thompson's expression shifted slightly. "Well, that's something we need to discuss with the financial counselor and your insurance company. This is a very expensive procedure, and we want to make sure everything is properly authorized before we proceed." The words hit Rebecca like cold water. In all her worry about Sophia's health, she'd somehow managed to push aside the reality of what this would cost. But now, sitting in this sterile consultation room while her daughter lay sleeping down the hall, the financial implications came crashing back. That afternoon, Rebecca found herself sitting across from Janet Hoffman, the hospital's financial counselor. Janet was a kind woman in her 50s who'd clearly had difficult conversations with desperate families many times before. "Let me be upfront with you, Mrs. Martinez. I've reviewed your insurance plan, and while it will cover a portion of Sophia's treatment, your out of pocket expenses are going to be substantial. Janet slid a paper across the desk. Rebecca looked at the numbers and felt the room start to spin. The total estimated cost of Sophia's surgery and hospital stay was $347,000. After insurance adjustments and payments, Rebecca's portion would be just over $89,000. I I don't have that kind of money, Rebecca whispered. I understand. We have payment plan options, and there are some charitable programs we can explore, but the hospital does require a significant portion up front before scheduling a procedure of this magnitude. Rebecca stared at the numbers, trying to make sense of them. $89,000. It might as well have been $1 million. Her combined income from both jobs was barely $32,000 a year. Even if she stopped eating, stopped paying rent, stopped everything, she couldn't come up with that money. How much up front? She managed to ask. For a procedure of this cost and complexity, we typically require 50% of the estimated patient portion, so we're looking at approximately $45,000. The room felt like it was tilting. Rebecca gripped the edges of her chair and tried to focus on breathing. $45,000. She had $1,247 in her checking account and maybe another $300 in savings. What happens if I can't pay it? Janet's expression softened with genuine sympathy. We can work with you on payment arrangements, but the surgeons and anesthesiologists won't proceed without some guarantee of payment. It's hospital policy. Rebecca walked back to Sophia's room in a daze. Her daughter was awake, reading a book someone had brought from the hospital's library cart. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Hey, Mom, Dr. Thompson said they think they can get all of it out. That's good news, right? Rebecca managed a smile and kissed Sophia's forehead. That's wonderful news, Mija. But inside, Rebecca's mind was racing. How do you tell your 15-year-old daughter that you can't afford to save her life? The next morning, Rebecca sat in her car in the hospital parking garage, phone pressed to her ear as she called in sick to both her jobs. She'd never taken consecutive days off from either position, but explaining to her supervisors that her daughter had cancer felt impossible over a 30-second voicemail. Her sister Maria had driven down from Flagstaff the night before, and Rebecca was grateful to have someone watch Sophia while she tried to figure out the impossible math of saving her daughter's life. Maria worked as a teacher's aide and had 3 kids of her own. Asking her for money wasn't even an option. Rebecca had spent most of the night on her phone, researching everything she could about hepatoblastoma, treatment options, and hospital financing. The internet was full of crowdfunding campaigns for families in similar situations, stories of communities rallying together, of medical miracles, and last-minute interventions. But it also had darker stories. Families that had lost everything trying to save a loved one, people who'd mortgaged their futures for treatments that didn't work. The worst part was reading the statistics about delayed treatment. Every article emphasized the same thing Dr. Thompson had told her: time was critical. Each day they waited increased the risk that the cancer would spread or become inoperable. Back in Sophia's room, Rebecca tried to maintain a brave face while her daughter chatted with the child life specialist about the art therapy program. Sophia had always been artistic, spending hours sketching marine life and dreaming about studying ocean ecosystems. Watching her daughter adapt so quickly to the hospital routine while Rebecca fell apart inside was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Mrs. Martinez? Dr. Thompson appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. Could I speak with you privately for a moment? They stepped into the hallway, where the constant beeping of monitors and shuffling of medical staff created a backdrop of organized urgency. I wanted to follow up on yesterday's conversation with our financial team. I know these situations are incredibly difficult, and I want you to know that our primary concern is getting Sophia the treatment she needs. Rebecca felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there were programs she hadn't heard about, grants or charitable funds specifically for cases like this. However, Dr. Thompson continued, I also need to be realistic with you about timing. Sophia's tumor is aggressive. Based on the growth rate we can calculate from her symptoms over the past few months, waiting more than 2 to 3 weeks significantly increases the complexity of the surgery and decreases our chances of complete removal. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. 2 to 3 weeks to come up with $45,000. I understand, Rebecca said, though nothing about this situation was understandable. That afternoon, while Sophia napped, Rebecca made a series of phone calls that felt like systematic humiliation. She called the bank about a loan, only to be told that her income and credit score wouldn't qualify her for more than $5,000. She contacted 3 different charitable organizations, filling out applications that would take weeks to process, time Sophia didn't have. She even called her ex-husband's mother in California, a woman who'd made it clear years ago that she blamed Rebecca for her son's death in a car accident when Sophia was 3. The conversation lasted exactly 90 seconds before Rebecca hung up, fighting back tears of rage and frustration. By Thursday, desperation had set in. Rebecca found herself researching things she'd never imagined considering, taking out loans against her car, borrowing from payday loan companies with impossible interest rates, even looking into selling her plasma. None of it would come close to the money she needed, but she had to try something. Maria had gone back to Flagstaff to handle her own family responsibilities, leaving Rebecca alone with the weight of impossible decisions. She sat in the hospital cafeteria at 2 in the morning, surrounded by other families dealing with their own crises, and tried to figure out how to tell Sophia that they might need to explore other options. The conversation with Dr. Thompson about alternative treatments had been devastating. Yes, there were other hospitals that might be able to perform the surgery for less money, but Sophia would need to be stable enough for transfer, and the delay could mean a more complex procedure with lower success rates. There were specialized treatments and clinical trials, but Sophia's specific case didn't qualify for the ones currently accepting patients. Friday morning brought a meeting with the hospital's patient advocate, a well-meaning woman named Sandra, who walked Rebecca through every possible option for financial assistance. They applied for emergency Medicaid coverage, knowing it would likely be denied since Rebecca technically made too much money, a cruel irony when that income was barely enough to survive. Sandra also helped Rebecca draft letters to local news stations and community organizations. Sometimes, she explained, media attention could motivate community support or pressure insurance companies to reconsider their coverage decisions. But these efforts would take time, and Sophia was running out of time. That evening, Rebecca sat beside Sophia's hospital bed, watching her daughter work on homework that had been brought from school. The teenager's determination to keep up with her classes while dealing with cancer treatments was both admirable and heartbreaking. "Mom, you look terrible," Sophia said, looking up from her algebra textbook. "When's the last time you went home and slept in a real bed?" "I'm fine, mija, just worried about you." "I know you're trying to figure out the money stuff." Sophia's directness caught Rebecca off guard. "I heard you talking to Aunt Maria yesterday." Rebecca felt her careful facade crumbling. She'd tried so hard to protect Sophia from the financial stress, but 15-year-olds weren't easily fooled. "Don't worry about that. That's my job to figure out." "But what if you can't?" Sophia's question hung in the air between them. "I mean, I know we're not rich, Mom. I know you work 2 jobs just to pay for our apartment. I'm not stupid." Rebecca reached for her daughter's hand. "We're going to find a way, I promise." "But what if we can't? What happens then?" It was the question Rebecca had been avoiding, the scenario she couldn't bear to consider. But looking into her daughter's eyes, she realized that Sophia was already considering it. This brave, brilliant girl was preparing herself for the possibility that her mother might not be able to save her. Saturday brought the weekend skeleton crew and a different energy in the hospital. Fewer doctors making rounds, fewer tests being run. Rebecca used the quieter pace to make more phone calls, reaching out to extended family members she hadn't spoken to in years. Her cousin Robert in Phoenix owned a small construction company and promised to see what he could do, though Rebecca could hear in his voice that it wouldn't be enough. Her father's sister in Tucson was dealing with her own husband's medical bills after a heart attack. Everyone was sympathetic, everyone wanted to help, but nobody had the kind of money Rebecca needed. Sunday afternoon, Rebecca found herself in the hospital chapel, a small, non-denominational room with simple wooden pews and soft lighting. She hadn't prayed regularly since Sophia's father died, but desperation had driven her to consider every possible source of help. She wasn't alone in the chapel. An elderly man sat in the front pew, and a woman about Rebecca's age was crying quietly in a corner. This was clearly a place where families came when medicine and money weren't enough. Rebecca closed her eyes and tried to form words that made sense. How do you pray for $45,000? How do you ask for a miracle while planning for failure? She found herself making bargains with a universe that had already taken too much from her family, promising to work harder, to be better, to give back somehow if only Sophia could be saved. When she opened her eyes, nothing had changed. The chapel was still quiet, the hospital was still expensive, and Sophia was still running out of time. Monday morning brought the conversation Rebecca had been dreading. Dr. Thompson requested a meeting to discuss next steps, which she knew was medical terminology for accepting reality. Mrs. Martinez, I want to be clear that we haven't given up on finding a solution, but I also have an obligation to discuss all options with you, including what we might do if the current surgical plan isn't feasible. He spread out papers showing different treatment approaches, less aggressive surgeries that would be cheaper but less likely to cure the cancer completely, palliative care options that would manage Sophia's symptoms but wouldn't eliminate the disease. If we can't proceed with the full resection, we could potentially do a partial removal to buy time while we continue working on funding options. It's not ideal, but it would at least address the most immediate threats. Rebecca stared at the treatment plans, each representing a different version of her daughter's future. The words blurred together as she tried to process what Dr. Thompson was really telling her, that they were moving from cure to management, from hope to damage control. That afternoon, Janet from Financial Services called with what she described as potentially good news. The hospital had a special fund for exceptional cases, donations from wealthy benefactors specifically designated for families who couldn't afford critical care. The committee meets on Wednesday, and I can present Sophia's case. It's competitive. We typically receive 50 applications for every grant we can approve, but her situation is exactly what these funds were designed for. Rebecca felt a surge of hope, followed immediately by the crash of reality. Wednesday was 6 days away. The committee would need time to review applications. Even if they approved funding, it would be at least 10 days before surgery could be scheduled. How long can we wait? She asked Dr. Thompson when she relayed the information. His pause told her everything she needed to know before he spoke. 2 weeks, maximum. After that, we're looking at a much more complex situation. That night, Rebecca made a decision that would haunt her for months. She couldn't wait for committees and applications and the slow machinery of charitable bureaucracy. She had to try something else, even if it meant risking everything. Tuesday morning, she walked into the offices of Phoenix Financial Solutions, a company that specialized in high-risk loans for desperate people. The interest rates were criminal, the terms were designed to trap borrowers in permanent debt, but they could approve loans within hours. The loan officer, a sharp-dressed man who clearly made his living off other people's desperation, reviewed Rebecca's application with practiced efficiency. I can approve you for $18,000, secured against your car and future wages. But Mrs. Martinez, I need to be clear about what you're signing up for. The payments on this loan will be about $800 a month for the next 5 years. Miss a payment, and we repossess your vehicle immediately. Rebecca signed the papers anyway. $18,000 wasn't enough, but it was something. Combined with the money she could borrow against her credit cards and the small loan from the bank, she might reach $30,000. Still not enough, but closer. Walking out of that office, Rebecca felt like she'd signed away her future, mortgaged her life for a chance to save her daughters. But as she headed back to the hospital, she realized she'd do it again in a heartbeat. The question that remained was whether any of it would be enough to convince the hospital to proceed with Sophia's surgery, and time was running out for answers. In turn, the possibility that Sophia could actually receive the surgery felt almost too overwhelming to believe. Dr. Thompson's expression shifted from professional concern to genuine surprise as he reviewed the updated insurance authorization that had just appeared in his email. Rebecca sat across from his desk, still processing the phone conversation with David Chen, feeling like she'd stepped into an alternate reality where good things were actually possible. This is remarkable, Mrs. Martinez. I have to admit, in 20 years of practice, I've never seen an insurance reversal quite this dramatic or this last minute. He scrolled through the authorization details on his computer screen. According to this, we're cleared to proceed with the full surgical plan we originally discussed. No restrictions, no limitations. Rebecca felt her legs go weak with relief. So we can schedule the surgery? We can schedule it for tomorrow morning if you're ready. I've been keeping OR time blocked in case we got good news, and frankly, the sooner we proceed, the better. Tomorrow morning. After weeks of impossible obstacles and sleepless nights, her daughter could be getting life-saving surgery in 18 hours. The speed of it felt almost surreal. What do I need to do? Just give consent and prepare Sophia. The pre-surgical team will handle everything else. Mrs. Martinez, I want you to know that catching this insurance issue when we did, it likely saved your daughter's life. Another week of delay could have made this a much more complicated case. Walking back to Sophia's room, Rebecca felt like she was floating. The hallways that had felt so oppressive an hour ago now seemed bright and full of possibility. She passed other families in the corridors and wanted to tell them that sometimes the system actually worked, that miracles could happen even in the most bureaucratic circumstances. She found Sophia exactly where she'd left her, working on her underwater scene. But when Rebecca entered the room with a smile that couldn't be contained, Sophia immediately put down her pencil. "Mom, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost, but a good ghost." Rebecca sat on the edge of the hospital bed and took her daughter's hands. "Mija, the insurance company called. There was an error in how they processed your case. The surgery is covered. We can do it tomorrow morning." Sophia stared at her mother for a long moment, as if waiting for the catch, the additional complication that would steal this hope away. Covered how much? Almost everything. Instead of $45,000, we'll owe about $8,500 for the entire year of treatment. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in weeks, they weren't tears of fear or sadness. "So I'm going to be okay? You're going to be more than okay. You're going to beat this thing and go to college and become a marine biologist and discover new species of fish and probably lecture me about ocean conservation for the rest of my life." They held each other and cried, releasing weeks of accumulated terror and stress. Other patients and families in nearby rooms probably heard them, but Rebecca didn't care. For the first time since this nightmare began, her daughter had a real future. The rest of Wednesday passed in a blur of pre-surgical preparations. The anesthesiology team came by to discuss procedures and potential complications. The surgical coordinator reviewed the timeline, an 8 to 10-hour operation starting at 7 in the morning. The child life specialist helped Sophia understand what to expect during recovery. Rebecca called Maria to share the news, and her sister immediately offered to drive back down from Flagstaff to be there for the surgery. She also called her supervisors at both jobs, explaining that she'd need at least 2 more weeks off while Sophia recovered. That evening, as visiting hours wound down, Rebecca sat beside Sophia's bed, watching her daughter practice the breathing exercises the anesthesiologist had taught her. The teenager was nervous, but determined, asking detailed questions about the surgical procedure and recovery timeline. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Anything, Mija." "When you thought we couldn't afford the surgery, what were you going to do? I mean, really do?" Rebecca considered lying, protecting her daughter from the darker thoughts that had consumed her over the past few days. But Sophia deserved honesty. "I was going to figure out a way to transfer you to a county hospital, even if it meant starting over with new doctors. And if that didn't work, I was going to take you home and spend whatever time we had left making sure you knew how much I love you." Sophia nodded solemnly. "I would have been okay with that, as long as we were together. But now we don't have to find out. Now you get to live long enough to get tired of me worrying about you." Thursday morning arrived gray and cool, unusual weather for Phoenix in April. Rebecca had barely slept, but she felt more rested than she had in weeks. The weight of impossible decisions had been lifted, replaced by the normal anxiety of a parent sending their child into surgery. Maria arrived at 6 a.m. with coffee and homemade breakfast burritos, though none of them had much appetite. Sophia was restricted from eating before surgery, but she seemed calm as the preoperative team prepared her for the procedure. Dr. Thompson stopped by for a final consultation, explaining exactly what the surgical team would be doing and what the recovery process would look like. Sophia would spend the first few days in intensive care, then move to a regular room for several weeks of monitoring and healing. The good news is that liver tissue regenerates remarkably well, especially in someone your age, he told Sophia. 6 months from now, you'll have normal liver function and be able to do everything you did before. As they wheeled Sophia toward the operating room, she grabbed Rebecca's hand. Mom, promise me something. Anything. When I get out of this, when I'm better, promise me we'll do something to help other families who go through this, like write letters to insurance companies or something. What happened to us was wrong, and it probably happens to other people too. Rebecca squeezed her daughter's hand. I promise, mija. We'll figure out a way to make a difference. The surgical waiting room became Rebecca's world for the next 9 hours. Maria brought magazines that went unread, crossword puzzles that remained unsolved. Every hour, a nurse would come out to provide updates. Surgery was progressing normally, no complications so far. The tumor was being successfully removed. Around hour 6, David Chen from the insurance company called to check on how things were going. It was an unexpected gesture that touched Rebecca more than she could express. Mrs. Martinez, I wanted you to know that I've been thinking about your family today. How is Sophia doing? The surgery is going well. They think they'll be finished in the next few hours. I'm so relieved to hear that. I also wanted to let you know that I've escalated your case within our organization. The system failures that led to this situation are being reviewed at the executive level. Our goal is to make sure no other family goes through what you experienced. Thank you, Mr. Chen. I don't think you understand how much your phone call yesterday meant to us. Actually, Mrs. Martinez, I think I do understand. I have a daughter myself, and I can't imagine what you've been through these past few weeks. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Dr. Thompson appeared in the waiting room, still wearing his surgical scrubs, but with a smile that told Rebecca everything she needed to know before he said a word. The surgery was a complete success. We were able to remove the entire tumor with clear margins, and Sophia's liver function looks excellent. She's going to make a full recovery. Rebecca collapsed into Maria's arms, overwhelmed by relief and gratitude and the simple miracle of good news after weeks of bad news. Can I see her? She's in recovery now, still sedated from anesthesia. Give us about 2 hours to get her settled in ICU, and then you can see her. Those 2 hours felt longer than the previous 9, but finally, Rebecca was allowed into the intensive care unit, where Sophia lay connected to various monitors and IV lines. Her daughter looked small and pale, but peaceful, breathing steadily with the help of a ventilator that would be removed once she was fully awake. Rebecca sat beside the bed and took Sophia's hand, careful not to disturb the IV lines. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine the future. Sophia graduating high school, applying to colleges with strong marine biology programs, maybe even studying abroad to research coral reefs or deep-sea ecosystems. When Sophia finally opened her eyes 12 hours later, her first words were, "Did they get it all?" "They got it all, mija. Dr. Thompson says you're going to be fine." Sophia smiled weakly and squeezed her mother's hand. "Good. Now I can focus on getting strong enough to change the world." Rebecca laughed through her tears. Even after everything they'd been through, her daughter was still making plans to save the oceans. The recovery process would take months, and there would be follow-up treatments and regular monitoring for years to come. But as Rebecca watched Sophia sleep in that ICU bed, surrounded by the beeping of machines that were helping her heal rather than measuring her decline, she knew they were going to be okay. More than that, she knew they were going to keep the promise Sophia had made before surgery. They were going to find a way to help other families navigate the impossible maze of medical insurance and hospital billing, because no parent should ever have to choose between their child's life and financial ruin, and no 15-year-old should ever have to comfort their mother about the possibility of dying from a treatable disease. The system had nearly failed them completely, but it had also, in the end, saved them. Now it was their turn to help fix it for others. 3 weeks after surgery, Sophia was finally strong enough to sit up for extended periods and work on her laptop. Rebecca found her daughter typing furiously, surrounded by printed articles and handwritten notes that covered every surface of her hospital bed. "What are you working on so intensely?" Rebecca asked, settling into the familiar bedside chair that had become her second home. "Research," Sophia replied without looking up from the screen. "I'm documenting everything that happened to us, the insurance coding error, the delays, the financial stress. I want to understand how many other families this happens to." Rebecca peered at the laptop screen, which displayed a spreadsheet with dozens of entries. Sophia had somehow managed to find online forums, support groups, and news articles about families facing similar situations. "Look at this, Mom! The Martinez family in Tucson, not related to us. Their 8-year-old needed emergency heart surgery last year. Same insurance company, same coding error. They ended up declaring bankruptcy before someone figured out the mistake." Rebecca felt a familiar anger building in her chest. Their near disaster hadn't been an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that was destroying families across the state. "And here," Sophia continued, pointing to another entry, "the Johnson family in Flagstaff. Their teenager had a brain tumor. They sold their house and moved in with relatives before the insurance issue got resolved. By then, the stress had cost the father his job." Rebecca marveled at her daughter's determination to turn their traumatic experience into something constructive. Even while recovering from major surgery, Sophia was channeling her energy into research and advocacy. Dr. Thompson stopped by during his afternoon rounds, reviewing Sophia's latest blood work and liver function tests. The numbers continued to improve daily, confirming that the surgery had been a complete success. "How are you feeling about going home next week?" he asked Sophia. "Excited, but also nervous. I want to make sure I don't waste this second chance, you know?" Dr. Thompson smiled. "Based on what I've seen from you over the past month, I don't think wasting opportunities is something you need to worry about." After he left, Rebecca broached a subject she'd been considering since David Chen's follow-up calls. "Miha, I've been thinking about what you said before surgery, about helping other families. David Chen from the insurance company has been calling me regularly to check on your recovery, and he mentioned that their company is reviewing their entire claims processing system because of what happened to us." Sophia looked up from her laptop with interest. "Really? What kind of review?" "He said they're forming some kind of patient advocacy committee to prevent coding errors like ours. He asked if we'd be willing to participate, share our story to help them understand where the system breaks down." "Would we get to help write new policies?" "I think so. He mentioned they want patient families involved in designing better communication protocols and appeal processes." Sophia's eyes lit up with the same intensity Rebecca had seen when her daughter talked about marine biology research projects. "Mom, we have to do this. Think about all the families we could help." The following week, Sophia was discharged with a detailed recovery plan and a stack of follow-up appointments. Coming home to their small apartment felt strange after a month in the hospital. Everything looked the same, but Rebecca and Sophia had been fundamentally changed by their experience. The financial situation, while no longer catastrophic, still required careful management. Rebecca had accumulated significant debt during the weeks before the insurance approval, and paying off the predatory loans would take months. But compared to the financial ruin she'd been facing, these manageable payments felt almost luxurious. More importantly, David Chen had connected them with Horizon Health's patient advocate services, which helped Rebecca understand options for financial hardship assistance. The company agreed to cover some of the costs she'd incurred due to their initial error, though the legal department made it clear this was a goodwill gesture rather than an admission of liability. 2 months after Sophia's discharge, Rebecca found herself sitting in a conference room at Horizon Health's Phoenix offices, surrounded by insurance executives, medical professionals, and other families who'd experienced similar system failures. David Chen had organized the meeting as part of the company's systematic review of their claims processing procedures. Around the table sat the Rodriguez family from Tucson, whose son had needed emergency kidney surgery, the Thompson family from Mesa, whose daughter required specialized cancer treatment, and the Williams family from Scottsdale, whose toddler had been born with a complex heart defect. Each family's story followed a similar pattern: urgent medical needs, insurance denials based on coding errors, financial desperation, and eventual resolution that came almost too late to matter. The systemic nature of the problem became undeniable when viewed collectively. What we're seeing, explained Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a healthcare policy consultant brought in to facilitate the discussion, is that your current system requires frontline customer service representatives to make complex medical coverage decisions without sufficient training or access to complete information. Rebecca listened as other parents described experiences that mirrored her own: the desperate phone calls, the contradictory information from different representatives, the feeling of being trapped in a bureaucratic maze while their children's health deteriorated. Mrs. Rodriguez spoke about selling her car to pay for her son's dialysis treatments while fighting the insurance denial. Mr. Thompson described taking a second mortgage on their house to cover his daughter's chemotherapy. Each story reinforced Rebecca's understanding that their family's near disaster was part of a much larger crisis. The question, David Chen said, is how we redesign our processes to prevent these failures from happening in the first place. Sophia, who had insisted on attending despite still being in recovery, raised her hand. At 16, she was the youngest person in the room, but her research over the past few months had given her insights that impressed even the healthcare policy experts. "I think the problem is that you're treating medical emergencies like routine insurance claims," she said. "When someone calls about their child's cancer treatment, that call should be automatically escalated to specialists who understand both the medical and coverage issues." The insurance executives exchanged glances. Coming from a teenager who'd nearly died due to their systems failures, the suggestion carried particular weight. "What would that look like practically?" asked Jennifer Walsh, Horizon Health's Director of Customer Operations. "You could create a pediatric emergency team," Sophia continued, consulting her notes. "Any claim involving a child's life-threatening condition gets reviewed within 24 hours by someone with medical training and full access to coverage databases. No more passing families between different departments while kids get sicker." Rebecca felt a surge of pride watching her daughter articulate solutions that had clearly been developed through weeks of careful research and analysis. The meeting lasted 3 hours, with families and insurance staff working together to identify specific changes that could prevent future tragedies. By the end, Horizon Health had committed to implementing several reforms, including the pediatric emergency review team Sophia had proposed. But more importantly for Rebecca, the meeting connected their family with other advocates working on healthcare policy reform at the state level. Within a month, Rebecca found herself testifying before an Arizona legislative committee about insurance claim processing and the need for stronger patient protections. Standing at the podium in the state capitol building, Rebecca looked out at legislators and reporters and thought about how far their journey had taken them. 6 months earlier, she'd been a single mother working 2 jobs and trying to stay invisible. Now, she was advocating for systemic changes that could protect thousands of families. "My daughter Sophia is alive today because one insurance employee, David Chen, took the time to look deeper into our case when it didn't make sense to him," Rebecca told the committee. "But no family should have to depend on that kind of individual heroism to save their child's life. We need systems that work correctly the first time, every time." The legislation that emerged from those hearings, nicknamed Sophia's Law by local media, required insurance companies to establish expedited review processes for pediatric emergencies and mandated that denial decisions involving children's critical care be reviewed by medical professionals within 48 hours. 8 months after her surgery, Sophia returned to school part-time, continuing her recovery while maintaining her advocacy work. She'd started a blog documenting healthcare policy issues affecting families, which had gained a surprising following among parents, medical professionals, and policy researchers. Her marine biology dreams hadn't disappeared, but they'd expanded to include healthcare advocacy and policy research. Rebecca often found her daughter working on homework with one browser tab open to oceanography articles and another displaying healthcare reform legislation. Sophia said one evening as they worked together at their kitchen table, Rebecca grading inventory reports, Sophia researching ocean acidification for a bio. I used to think I'd spend my life studying fish. Now I think maybe I'll study fish and healthcare policy. Someone needs to understand both. Rebecca smiled, remembering the terrified 15-year-old who doubled over with stomach pain 8 months earlier. That girl had been replaced by a young woman who saw problems as puzzles to be solved and trauma as motivation for change. The financial stress had eased considerably. Rebecca had been promoted to assistant manager at Valley Medical Supply after her supervisor learned about her advocacy work, recognizing leadership skills he hadn't previously noticed. The pay increase wasn't dramatic, but combined with payment plans for the remaining debt, it made their life sustainable again. More surprisingly, David Chen had become an unlikely family friend. His initial professional interest in their case had evolved into genuine personal investment in Sophia's recovery and their advocacy work. He often called with updates about policy changes at Horizon Health or to ask for their input on new patient communication procedures. Mrs. Martinez, he'd said during a recent call, I want you to know that the changes we've implemented based on your family's experience have already prevented 12 similar cases this year. 12 families didn't have to go through what you went through. 12 families. Rebecca tried to imagine 12 other mothers who didn't have to take out predatory loans or spend sleepless nights wondering if they could save their children's lives. 12 kids who got the medical care they needed without delays caused by bureaucratic errors. As winter approached Phoenix, bringing the mild temperatures that made the desert livable, Rebecca reflected on the strange trajectory their lives had taken. The worst crisis her family had ever faced had somehow led to the most meaningful work she'd ever done. Sophia's latest blood tests showed normal liver function, and her energy levels had returned to their pre-cancer intensity. But instead of simply resuming her old life, she'd built something entirely new, a sense of purpose that combined her intellectual curiosity with hard-earned wisdom about how systems could fail the people they were supposed to protect. Mom, Sophia said one evening, looking up from a policy paper she was reviewing for an advocacy organization, do you ever wonder what would have happened if Mr. Chen hadn't made that phone call? Rebecca considered the question seriously. I try not to think about it too much, but I know we wouldn't be here, doing this work, if things had been easy from the beginning. So maybe the system breaking down was actually the thing that gave us the chance to help fix it. Maybe, Mija. Or maybe you're just the kind of person who finds ways to turn every experience into something meaningful. Sophia grinned and returned to her reading, already planning the next letter to legislators, the next research project, the next small step toward a healthcare system that worked for everyone. Outside their apartment window, Phoenix stretched toward the mountains under a sky full of stars. Tomorrow would bring more advocacy work, more medical follow-ups, more ordinary challenges of building a life. But tonight, Rebecca Martinez sat at her kitchen table with her healthy, brilliant, determined daughter and felt grateful for every impossible thing they'd survived together. 1 year after Sophia's surgery, Rebecca received a phone call that would once again change the trajectory of their lives, though this time under circumstances she never could have anticipated. Mrs. Martinez, this is Amanda Foster from the National Healthcare Advocacy Institute in Washington, D.C. I've been following your work on insurance reform in Arizona, particularly the legislation that passed after your daughter's case. Rebecca was sitting in the break room at Valley Medical Supply, eating a sandwich during her lunch hour. The past year had established a routine of normalcy that she treasured, but this call suggested that their quiet period of rebuilding might be coming to an end. We're organizing a national task force on pediatric healthcare access, and we'd like to invite you and Sophia to participate. The initiative has support from both major political parties and several healthcare organizations. The opportunity was both thrilling and terrifying. Rebecca had grown comfortable advocating at the state level, where she understood the players and the process. National healthcare policy felt like an entirely different universe of complexity and competing interests. What would that involve exactly? Initially, we'd fly you and Sophia to Washington for a week-long conference in March. You'd be working with families from across the country who faced similar challenges, along with policy experts, medical professionals, and congressional staff. The goal is to develop a comprehensive federal approach to preventing the kind of system failures your family experienced. Rebecca promised to discuss it with Sophia and call back within a week. Walking back to her desk, she realized that the scared woman who'd once been afraid to take time off work for her daughter's medical appointments had been replaced by someone who was being asked to help shape national policy. That evening, she found Sophia at the kitchen table working on college applications. At 17, her daughter was maintaining a 4.2 GPA while continuing her advocacy work and preparing for early admission to several universities with strong marine biology programs. "Guess what arrived in the mail today?" Sophia said, holding up an envelope from UC San Diego. "My acceptance letter. Full scholarship." Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. A year earlier, college had seemed like an impossible dream, something that would have to be postponed indefinitely while they dealt with medical debt and recovery. Now Sophia had multiple scholarship offers and the luxury of choosing between excellent programs. "I'm so proud of you, Mija. Your father would be too." "Actually, Mom, I've been thinking about that. About Dad, I mean. I don't remember much about him, but I know he was studying environmental science when he died. I think he would have understood what we're doing now, trying to fix systems that don't work for regular people." Rebecca shared Amanda Foster's call and the invitation to participate in national healthcare reform efforts. Sophia's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. "We have to do this, Mom. Think about the scale of impact we could have. Arizona was just the beginning." The following week, Rebecca called Amanda Foster to accept the invitation. Within days, their lives accelerated again as they prepared for their first experience with national policy advocacy. In March, Rebecca and Sophia found themselves on their first flight to Washington, D.C., carrying briefcases full of documentation from their case and research they'd conducted over the past year. The airplane offered Rebecca her first real opportunity to reflect on how dramatically their lives had changed. A year earlier, she'd been a single mother, working 2 jobs and worried about paying for basic necessities. Now she was traveling to the nation's capital as a recognized expert on healthcare access issues, with expenses paid by a national advocacy organization that valued her insights. The National Healthcare Advocacy Institute occupied a modern building near Capitol Hill, filled with conference rooms where serious people discussed complex policy issues. Rebecca felt intimidated by the environment until she realized that many of the other participants were ordinary families who'd been thrust into advocacy by their own medical crises. The Williams family from Oregon had fought for 3 years to get coverage for their son's rare genetic condition. The Chen family from Michigan, no relation to David Chen from Horizon Health, had navigated bureaucratic nightmares when their daughter needed experimental cancer treatments. The stories were different in detail, but remarkably similar in structure. "What we're seeing," explained Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the Institute's research director, "is that individual families across the country are fighting the same battles in isolation. You win a victory in Arizona, they win something in Michigan, but the underlying problems persist because there's no coordinated national approach." Sophia raised her hand during the first day's session. "So we're basically treating symptoms instead of the disease?" Dr. Hendricks smiled. "That's exactly right, and that's why we need to think bigger about solutions." The week-long conference was intensive, with morning sessions focused on policy analysis and afternoon workshops where families worked with congressional staff to draft potential legislation. Rebecca found herself contributing to discussions about insurance regulation, medical billing transparency, and patient advocacy requirements. More surprising was Sophia's emergence as a natural policy analyst. Her combination of personal experience, systematic research skills, and teenage directness made her particularly effective at identifying flaws in proposed solutions. "This amendment sounds good," she said during one workshop, "but it still puts the burden on families to navigate the appeals process. What if the child is too sick for the parents to spend 40 hours a week fighting insurance companies?" The congressional staffer facilitating the session made notes. "What would you suggest instead?" "Automatic independent review for any denial involving pediatric emergencies. take the decision out of the insurance company's hands entirely and give it to medical professionals who don't have financial incentives to deny care. By the end of the week, Rebecca realized that their participation had evolved from sharing their story to actively shaping policy proposals. The legislation that emerged from the conference, dubbed the Pediatric Healthcare Protection Act, incorporated several ideas that Sophia had suggested. Returning to Phoenix, Rebecca faced a decision that would have been unthinkable 2 years earlier. Amanda Foster had offered her a position as the Institute's Southwest Regional Coordinator, working with families across several states to document healthcare access issues and develop advocacy strategies. The job would mean leaving Valley Medical Supply, giving up the security of steady employment for the uncertainty of advocacy work. But it would also mean dedicating herself full-time to the work that had given meaning to their traumatic experience. "What do you think, Miha?" Rebecca asked Sophia as they discussed the opportunity. "I think you already know what you want to do. You just want permission to take the risk." Sophia was right. The terrified woman who'd once been afraid to take time off work for medical emergencies had been replaced by someone who understood that some risks were worth taking. Rebecca gave her 2 weeks' notice at Valley Medical Supply, though her supervisor wasn't entirely surprised. "I've watched you become a different person this past year," he said. "You belong in work that matters to you." The regional coordinator position required travel throughout Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada, documenting cases and supporting families facing healthcare access challenges. Rebecca found herself spending 3 days a week on the road, visiting hospitals, meeting with insurance executives, and testifying before state legislatures. The work was emotionally demanding, requiring her to relive variations of her own nightmare while helping other families navigate similar crises. But it was also deeply fulfilling in ways her previous jobs had never been. 6 months into her new role, Rebecca received a call from David Chen, who had been promoted to Director of Patient Advocacy at Horizon Health, partly based on his work with their case. "Mrs. Martinez, I wanted to let you know that the reforms we implemented in Arizona are being adopted by our company nationwide. We're also sharing our protocols with other insurance companies through industry associations." "How many families has that helped?" "Based on our tracking, we've prevented over 200 coding errors that would have led to inappropriate denials for pediatric emergencies. And that's just our company. Other insurers who've adopted similar protocols are reporting comparable numbers." 200 families. Rebecca tried to comprehend the scale of suffering that had been prevented by their willingness to transform personal trauma into systemic advocacy. Meanwhile, Sophia had started her freshman year at UC San Diego, double majoring in marine biology and public policy. She called home twice a week with updates about her classes and ongoing advocacy work she was conducting with the university's Healthcare Policy Research Center. "Mom, I'm working on a research project analyzing state variations in pediatric emergency coverage. You won't believe the differences between states. A family in Texas facing the same situation we had would have completely different options than someone in California." "Are you thinking about expanding the work nationally?" "I'm thinking about it for my senior thesis, maybe even graduate school. There's so much work to be done." Rebecca smiled, remembering her daughter's original dreams of studying coral reefs and discovering new fish species. Those dreams hadn't disappeared, but they'd expanded to include understanding and reforming the systems that determined whether children lived or died based on their family's financial resources. As autumn arrived in Phoenix, bringing the first relief from summer heat, Rebecca reflected on the strange mathematics of transformation. Their family's worst crisis had become the foundation for work that was preventing similar crises for hundreds of other families. The financial picture had stabilized completely. Rebecca's new salary was higher than her combined income from 2 previous jobs, and the remaining debt from their medical crisis would be paid off within the year. More importantly, Sophia's college expenses were covered by scholarships that recognized both her academic excellence and her advocacy work. But the real transformation was harder to quantify. Rebecca had discovered capabilities she'd never known she possessed, finding her voice in policy debates and developing expertise in healthcare systems that surprised even the professionals she worked with. One evening, while reviewing case files for an upcoming presentation to the Nevada legislature, Rebecca came across a letter from a mother in Las Vegas whose son had received immediate surgery approval after calling the pediatric emergency hotline that had been established based on Sophia's recommendations. "Your daughter's ideas saved my son's life," the letter read. "The insurance company approved his surgery within 6 hours because of the protocols you helped create. I will never be able to thank you enough for the work you've done." Rebecca called Sophia at college to share the letter. Her daughter listened quietly, then responded with characteristic thoughtfulness. "Mom, remember when I was lying in that hospital bed before surgery and I asked you to promise we'd find a way to help other families? I remember. I think we're keeping that promise, but I also think we're just getting started." Outside Rebecca's apartment window, the lights of Phoenix stretched toward the mountains under a clear desert sky. Tomorrow would bring more case files, more families to help, more small steps toward a healthcare system that worked for everyone. But tonight, Rebecca Martinez sat in her kitchen reading thank you letters from families she'd never met, whose children are alive because her daughter had refused to let their trauma be meaningless. The scared single mother who'd once been afraid to take time off work had become someone who shaped national policy. The 15-year-old cancer patient had become a university student conducting research that would influence healthcare access for years to come. And somewhere in the bureaucratic machinery of insurance companies and hospital systems, new protocols existed that treated pediatric emergencies with the urgency they deserved, ensuring that no family would face the impossible choice between their child's life and financial ruin. Not every family, not yet, but more families than before, and more each month, as their work continued to ripple outward through legislation, policy changes, and simple human recognition that some things were too important to leave to chance. 2 years later, Rebecca stood at the podium in the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, holding a folder containing testimonies from 847 families whose lives had been changed by the Pediatric Healthcare Protection Act. The legislation that had emerged from Sophia's ideas and their collective advocacy was finally moving toward a full congressional vote. "Honorable committee members," Rebecca began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment, "I'm here representing not just my own family's experience, but nearly 1,000 families who have faced life-threatening delays in pediatric health care due to insurance processing failures." The committee room was packed with advocates, medical professionals, and families who had traveled from across the country. In the gallery, Rebecca could see David Chen, who had flown in from Phoenix to witness the culmination of work that began with his phone call 3 years earlier. 3 years ago, my daughter Sophia was dying while I scrambled to find $45,000 to save her life. Today, she's a sophomore at UC San Diego, conducting research that's informing healthcare policy in 12 states. That transformation was only possible because one insurance employee took the time to question a system that wasn't working. Rebecca paused, making eye contact with several committee members who had been following their case since the Arizona legislation passed. But individual heroism shouldn't be required to save children's lives. We need systems that work correctly from the beginning, every time, for every family. The hearing lasted 4 hours, with testimonies from families, medical professionals, and insurance industry representatives. The insurance companies had initially opposed the federal legislation, arguing that it would increase costs and bureaucratic complexity. But after 2 years of successful implementation in pilot states, even many industry leaders had come to support the reforms. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, now serving as the National Healthcare Advocacy Institute's policy director, presented data showing that states with pediatric emergency protocols had reduced inappropriate claim denials by 73%, while actually decreasing administrative costs for insurance companies. "When you get the decision right the first time," she explained to the committee, "you eliminate the expensive appeals process, the legal challenges, and the administrative overhead of managing delayed treatments that become more complex and costly." The most powerful testimony came from Sophia herself, now 19 and serving as the youth representative on the National Task Force. She had driven up from San Diego specifically for this hearing, missing 2 days of classes in marine biology and environmental policy. Committee members, I want to talk about the children who aren't here today. In the 3 years since my diagnosis, I've met hundreds of families fighting for their children's lives. Some of those children are thriving now because early intervention saved them. Others are gone because delays made treatable conditions terminal. Sophia's voice remained composed, but Rebecca could see the emotion in her daughter's eyes as she continued. The difference between those outcomes often came down to arbitrary insurance coding decisions made by people who never saw the child, never spoke to the doctors, never understood the urgency of the situation. That's not a healthcare system. That's a lottery where children's lives are the stakes. The committee chair, Representative Johnson from Texas, leaned forward. Ms. Martinez, you were 15 when this happened to your family. Now you're 19 and testifying before Congress. What would you say to people who argue that federal intervention isn't necessary, that the market will eventually solve these problems? Sophia looked directly at the congressman. Representative Johnson, the market had 16 years to solve this problem while I was growing up, and it got worse, not better. Children can't wait for market forces to decide their lives are worth protecting. We need federal standards that treat pediatric emergencies with the urgency they deserve, regardless of which state a child lives in or which insurance company their parents can afford. The applause from the gallery was immediate and sustained, despite the committee chair's calls for order. Rebecca felt her heart swell with pride, watching her daughter articulate complex policy positions with the confidence of someone who had lived through the consequences of system failures. After the hearing, Rebecca and Sophia joined other advocates for a reception hosted by the National Healthcare Advocacy Institute. The gathering felt like a reunion of warriors who had fought individual battles and somehow found their way to collective action. The Rodriguez family from Tucson was there, with their son Miguel now healthy and planning to study medicine. The Chen family from Michigan had brought their daughter Anna, who was considering a career in healthcare administration specifically to help reform the systems that had nearly failed her. It's remarkable, said Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the Institute's research director, how many of these children are choosing careers that will help them fix the problems they experienced. They're going to transform healthcare from the inside. David Chen approached Rebecca during the reception, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. His work with Horizon Health had evolved into a consulting practice, helping insurance companies implement patient-centered claim processing systems. Mrs. Martinez, I wanted you to know that Horizon Health's pediatric protocols are now being used by insurance companies, covering 40 million Americans. The ripple effects from your family's case have been extraordinary. David, you changed our lives with that phone call. But more than that, you were willing to admit that the system was broken and work to fix it. Actually, I think your family changed my life. Before your case, I was just processing claims and following procedures. Now I understand that every file represents a real family facing a real crisis. As the evening wound down, Rebecca found herself standing on the Capitol steps with Sophia, looking out at the lights of Washington. The city that had once felt impossibly distant and complex now felt like a place where ordinary people could influence extraordinary change. Mom, do you ever think about what would have happened if Mr. Chen hadn't called that day? Rebecca considered the question that Sophia had asked in various forms over the years. I used to think about it constantly. Now, I think maybe the real question is what we did with the second chance we got. I've been thinking about that too, and I think we're not done yet. Sophia pulled out her phone and showed Rebecca a message she'd received that afternoon from a freshman at UC San Diego who was starting a campus organization focused on healthcare advocacy. Her name is Emma Williams. Her little brother has diabetes, and her family has been fighting insurance denials for his continuous glucose monitor. She wants to create a national network of college students working on healthcare access issues. Rebecca smiled. Another generation getting involved? Exactly, and I think that's how real change happens, not just through legislation, but through people deciding they're not going to accept broken systems anymore. 6 months later, the Pediatric Healthcare Protection Act passed both houses of Congress and was signed into law. Rebecca watched the signing ceremony from the East Room of the White House, surrounded by families whose advocacy had made the legislation possible. President Martinez, no relation, despite sharing the surname, spoke about the importance of protecting America's most vulnerable citizens and ensuring that no family faced financial ruin while trying to save their child's life. This law represents the best of American problem solving, the president said. Citizens who experienced system failures didn't just complain. They organized, researched solutions, and worked with both parties to create better outcomes for everyone. After the ceremony, Rebecca called Sophia, who was in the middle of marine biology field research in the Galapagos Islands, but had watched the signing online. "We did it, mija. It's actually law now." "Mom, I'm sitting here watching sea lions that have never worried about health insurance, and I'm crying happy tears. How weird is that?" Rebecca laughed. "I think it means you're exactly who you're supposed to be, someone who cares about fixing broken systems, whether they're in the ocean or in Washington." Speaking of which, I have news. I got accepted to the joint JD PhD program at Stanford, environmental law and marine biology. I want to work on climate policy after I graduate. From healthcare to environmental law? It's all connected, Mom. The same kind of systematic thinking that helped us fix insurance problems can help address climate change, and the same advocacy skills we learned fighting for my life can help fight for the planet's life. That evening, Rebecca sat in her Phoenix apartment, now redecorated and expanded after her promotion to the National Healthcare Advocacy Institute's regional director for the Southwest. The walls were covered with thank you letters from families, photos from congressional hearings, and Sophia's artwork from various stages of her recovery and growth. The transformation felt complete, yet ongoing. The scared single mother who had once worked 2 jobs just to survive had become someone whose work influenced national policy. The 15-year-old cancer patient had become a young woman conducting research that would help address global environmental challenges. But perhaps the most important change was simpler. Their family had learned that trauma could become the purpose, that individual suffering could generate collective action, and that ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges could create extraordinary solutions. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message from a mother in Chicago whose son had just received immediate approval for emergency surgery through the pediatric protocols they had helped create. "Your daughter's ideas saved my baby's life," the message read. "Thank you for turning your pain into protection for other families." Outside her window, Phoenix sprawled under its familiar canopy of stars. The city where Rebecca had once felt invisible now served as the headquarters for advocacy work that protects children across the country. The desert that had seemed harsh and unforgiving during their medical crisis now felt like home to a family that had discovered they could bloom in the most challenging circumstances. Tomorrow would bring new cases, new families to help, new opportunities to improve systems that determine whether children lived or died. Sophia would continue her research in marine conservation while planning law school applications. David Chen would help more insurance companies implement patient-centered protocols, and hundreds of families receive emergency medical care without delays, bureaucratic nightmares, or financial devastation. Not every family, not yet, but more families than yesterday and more tomorrow than today. The phone call that had saved Sophia's life had become a movement that was saving thousands of lives. The insurance error that had nearly destroyed their family had become the foundation for legislation that protected millions of families. And the promise Sophia had made before surgery to help other families facing similar challenges had evolved into a lifetime commitment that was reshaping American healthcare policy, one family, one case, one law at a time. Rebecca Martinez closed her laptop, turned off the lights, and headed to bed. In the morning, there would be more work to do, more systems to improve, more children to protect. But tonight, she fell asleep knowing that the most important work of her life had begun with the most terrifying phone call she'd ever received, and had become the most meaningful legacy she could possibly leave for the daughter who had taught her that crisis could become purpose, and that love, combined with determination, could literally change the world. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.